Greetings, I'm Sophis. Today I'm bringing you a build focused on mixing the range capacity of Longbows and the new Tome of the Weaver. The transformation in that tome gives every farm unit a chance to apply Immobilized. That, plus the assistance of other spells, should permit you to field an army almost entirely composed of ranged units, with a few drawbacks. Unit-wise, of course, our main focus is the Longbow. To make the most out of them, we'll want to give them more range, more damage, and as a subset of that, more critical hit chance. The first step to help with the increasing damage is easy thanks to the DLC. Frenzying Imbuement and the Strength Sapping Imbuement let each repeating attack give 2 stacks of Strengthened, quickly ramping up a Longbow to the maximum 5 stacks. This gives them a baseline 50% extra damage. To add to the base damage of each shot, we have Obsidian Weapons and Cosmos Awakening. Then, to increase critical hit chance, we have both Flame Burst Weapons and Fateful Imbuement. The final touches are Seeker Arrows for extra range and Dread Hunters, giving 20% more damage versus an immobilized target or a frozen target. The Obsidian Weapons enchantment plays an important role in the build since, as a feudal culture, we don't have access to status reduction as powerful as Tyranny Dark cultures get, nor do we get Cold Dark during the normal course of the build. That said, we could get this tome later on, or interrupt the build path to acquire it along the way. But, without accounting for Cold Dark for the moment, the idea is to use Bleeding status to reduce enemy status resistance. Flesh-carved runes permit some status resistance bypass so long as the Bleeding stacks are applied on the enemy. As far as critical chance goes, the baseline is 50% before other modifiers. Fiery Heart, alongside the 2 critical hit chance enchantments, get us that far. With the affinities in this build, your ruler and heroes can get as much as 3 chaos signature skills, which means we can bump that up to 80% chance. This leaves the remaining 20% chance to situational modifiers like High Morale, Fortune, or Siege projects like Foresee Downfall. This just about covers the overall situation on the Longbows. They will perform well in combat and will engage enemies from exceptional range. The other part of this strategy comes from the combat spells you'll have access to. Conjure Orb of Desire and Conjure Weaver Spiders will do a lot of work in regards to keeping enemies spread out, isolated, or delayed. The first spell you will only really use until you get the Weaver Spider summon, or in an emergency when your casting points are low. The benefit of the Weaver Spider summons is that they will get access to all the enchantments that your Longbows get, on top of being 2 units you can spread around if necessary to be a distraction. You will, in effect, use them to kite around the enemy, though with them you can't guarantee that the enemy will go for them instead of your permanent units. Now, I'd like to go over a drawback of this build. Although it is interesting, and in the right conditions it is fairly powerful, Age of Wonders has plenty of enemies that are either immune to bleeding or immobilized, or immune to both. When one or the other are true, you lose a significant amount of damage over time and battlefield control. This is only worse when both these conditions are true. It isn't impossible to navigate this scenario, as some of the footage in this video will show where I've gone up against a siege full of ethereal units who cannot be immobilized. Still, I feel it is important to point out the drawbacks of the strategy so you can plan and work around it. One thing that can alleviate the problem somewhat is the Tome of the Cold Dark, as I've mentioned earlier. It doesn't feature in the standard build path, as in the 9 tomes that a normal build has, but it can be worked in as soon as the second tier 3 tome in this build, right after Weaver. Flash Freeze would allow debuffs to land more reliably, and against targets immune to bleed and immobilized, it can at least mean easier application of Devolve to deal with powerful high-tier enemies. Another solution comes from the ruler and hero options. Warlocks can go a long way into debuffing enemy units thanks to hexing them, and any melee-oriented hero can help weaken priority targets thanks to the debilitating aura skill in Adept of Chaos. With adjacency, any target will be far more susceptible to debuff application, and there is no reason for not having this skill in every melee hero, since we want 3 Chaos Affinity signature skills on each of them for the sake of critical hit chance for your army. I would say a healthy mix of ranged and melee heroes will be of great help, but adjust accordingly to your preferred playstyle. With society and form traits, there's some flexibility. The culture is feudal-monarchy, and the one required society trait is Empire of the Cosmos to unlock the tome restrictions. The second society trait only needs to be a nature-aligned one. I've gone with Apex Predators for raiding and growing cities. Regarding form traits, there's 2 reasonable options. First, keen-sighted, strong, then a 1-point trait like Underground Adaptation for flavor. The second option keeps keen-sighted and strong. Then pick a drawback like Careless in order to get Overwhelm tactics. This would ensure that, so long as the other critical hit chance increases in the build are met, you would get 100% critical hit chance before the occasional modifiers. This does, however, force you to keep form units adjacent instead of spreading them out further, which will be a drawback against enemies with area damage. Now let's look at the tomes. We start with Tome of Rock. It's important that we get obsidian weapons from this tome to permit the status resistance bypass. Aside from it, the other priority is the Lesser Stone Spirit summon to help the early game, especially since it will be a while until you have the combat summons to protect your backline. Aside from it, pick Earthkin for a small defense boost to your form units. Next, Tome of the Bloodrite. As far as the Longbows are concerned, flesh-carved runes is the main research. But for your other units, Sanguine Focus and Blood-Drinking Blades help them out. Although I often recommend this whenever Bloodrite is in a build, the Rite of Life Leeching isn't as valuable in this build. The reason being that Longbows already build up strengthened stacks on their own quite easily. Still, if you want it, research it, and build the Chaos Bolstering Matrix. The 4 stacks to a group of Longbows would make their first hit stronger, even though it wouldn't matter as much past the initial turn. Tome of Burning Passion opens up Tier 2. The Strength Sapping Imbuement is vital to building up the damage of the Longbows as mentioned, and Conjure Orb of Desire is one of the tools in your arsenal to keep enemies off of your ranged units. Fiery Heart is also essential to the critical hit chance increase. Aside from these, you could research Blazing Aura to help your melee, or even get the Temptress to help disrupt enemies and their formations. That said, they aren't as powerful in this build as they were in Knights of the Cosmos, as debuff application is less likely here. Next we have Tome of Winds. We really just want Seeker Arrows here. Though the tome has decent combat spells, we don't want to waste our casting points on them when we have combat summons to use. Use the researches in this tome to grab whatever else you wanted from the prior tomes or the cultural tome. Finally, we get to Tome of the Weaver. Here we want Spider's Embrace first and foremost, then Dread Hunters for extra damage opportunities. Conjure Weaver Spiders will be a very reliable spell as an upgrade to using the Orb of Desire. I would not recommend Dreadful Bind since it will compete with the other spells for casting points. The Priest of the Weave has a revival strategy that doesn't mesh with how this faction is played, but has a very strong single target heal, so research them if you want. I'll make a quick aside here to remind you of something said in an earlier section. Although not contemplated on the overall build, this is the earliest point you can grab Cold Dark for the sake of getting Flesh Freeze to let you apply debuffs more effectively. That said, it will slow down tome progression. Next we have Tome of Devastation. I would recommend this one before Prophecies due to the chaos affinity and your heroes. If you push back Devastation, it is entirely possible that your heroes unlock their second signature skill before you can pick Chaos a second time. So unless you pay to retrain them, or deal with the constant reminder of not picking a signature skill, you would have to wait patiently for Devastation. From this tome, we want Flame Burst weapons, the first big critical hit chance increase. Similarly to Winds, there isn't much in this tome that benefits the Longbows past that, even though the enchantment is really important for it. Focus of Devastation will help your other units a bit. Then we have Tome of Prophecies. Like the prior tome, we're here for the critical hit chance increase. Fateful Imbuement is the key research. Unlike Devastation, there's plenty to make use of in this tome. Foresee Downfall will help your longbows in sieges, and Prescient Circlets can keep your melee protected and more durable when holding the line. Battle Divination has its uses, but like every other combat spell, it competes with your combat summons for casting points, so take that into consideration. The Oracle is a better support unit than the Priest of the Weave, since it can give your longbows True Strike, and the Area Heal also gives precognition. At tier 4, we just have one tome, Nature's Wrath. The Frenzying Imbuement is key due to the combo mentioned earlier. Other than that, Devolve is your sort of panic button combat spell. If you're facing dangerous enemies, you can't shut down the normal way. Devolve's value goes up significantly if you grab the Cold Dark Tome to help it land more reliably. Then at tier 5, you get the Tome of the Cosmos. Cosmos Awakening is the second base damage boost for your longbows, but a fairly hefty one at that. The extra affinities from this tome also permit you to grab the last Chaos signature skill for this build, going as far as 30% on the critical hit chance increase. Other than that, the Prismatic Tower will be helpful, but this build will only get the Materium, Chaos, and Nature benefits from it. If you grab Cold Dark, you'll unlock the Shadow Affinity benefit as well. By and large, that is the build. It is very reliant on tactics and positioning and does not favor auto-resolving, but it has a very clear strength in allowing you to field more damaging units and hitting enemies from very far. In its ideal conditions, it locks down a battlefield, and in problematic conditions, it still has its damage potential to pull through. And that's what I have for you today. I hope you're having a good day, and see you in the next one.